of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of the transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." All right, so one of the four horns grows a little horn that magnifies itself toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. What's the beautiful land? That's what I'm going with too. Do we know for any certainty or with any certainty? Not really. But that's the most logical answer. And considering what the rest of the vision is depicting, it fits the context, because he later starts talking about the temple and the sacrifices and all of those things that are affected. So it grows up to be, what's the language here? It became great, even as great as the prince of, well, I'll back up to verse 10. And it grew even to the host of heaven. And there again, this is language that becomes confusing. We got to keep in mind that this is symbolic language. And so you have to kind of use the context to understand. Obviously, stars come to mind when you talk about the host of heaven. What else comes to mind in a biblical setting when we talk about the host of heaven? Angels. Angels is a neat word, though. Angels is one of those words that you can really only know what the Bible's talking about when it uses the term angels by looking at the context that it's in. Because anybody know what the word angel actually means? Messenger. Are all messengers of God celestial beings? No, some messengers of God are men. And sometimes when that word is used in the Bible, it's very likely that it is talking about human messengers rather than heavenly messengers. So it is possible, and I think even likely in this context, that that's what's under consideration. We ain't talking about a human ruler that has grown up and become greater than the angels. We're talking about someone who takes dominance over the host of heaven. If we're talking about the messengers of God, who were the messengers of God of that day? The prophets specifically, and the prophets came from where? Israel. Who's the pillar and support of the truth today? The church. What's the parallel between the church in the Mosaic Law? Israel. We're spiritual Israel. We're the spiritual descendants of Abraham. And so I would submit to you that the messengers of God in that day, the people who were speaking for God in the world in that day, were whom? Israel. Israel were God's people. Israel were the chosen people. Israel had the prophets. Israel were publishing the word. The pagans that they were surrounded by weren't doing those things. And so what I think this is talking about is a leader that arose from among them, the Greeks, who became more powerful than the other four leaders that were represented by the first four horns, and grew so great and became dominant over even Israel. To what degree did he become dominant over Israel? Well, verses 10 and 11. It grows up to the host of heaven. It casts down some of the stars, which is dominance language. Cast down some of the stars. It exalts itself as high as the prince of the host. Exalts itself as high. Who was the prince of the host of Israel? Now, again, we're in symbolic language. Okay, the king would be the most obvious answer if we're limiting it to human, you could make an argument for a prophet. You could make an argument for even the high priest, who was the one who actually did what? What did the high priest do? He made atonement for the people. He's the one who went in once a year and actually stood before God and pled for the people. The high priest is the one who is the shadow of who? Christ. So it's fairly reasonable to say that maybe it's the high priest that's under consideration, especially considering the rest of what it says about what happens to the offering of the sacrifices in the temple in the coming verses. And then there's Prince of Peace language that's used always of the Messiah. Some of these rulers in this time frame, Nebuchadnezzar at the beginning of the book elevated himself to what level? To that of God. Is this a situation where we're talking about a ruler among the Greeks who became godlike in his power and influence? That's a possibility. In any of those cases, what's consistent to all of them? We're talking about a Greek ruler who arose and took control and power over all of these things. Over Israel, over the sacrifices, over the temple. We have a foreigner who is now in control. If we have a foreigner who's now in control, what do we not have? Israel in control. Israel has lost its dominion in the promised land. And that happens several times throughout their history. In every case, why does it happen? So God is allowing them to be disciplined. And he's using these foreign leaders to accomplish that. We got to keep that in mind. At least I think it's worthwhile to keep that in mind as we read through this. What we have being described here is a period in which a foreign ruler is going to take dominion over the people of God. And to the extent that he takes away the regular burnt offerings and the sanctuary is thrown down. Verse 11. The sanctuary literally is thrown down several times in history, like destroyed, had to be rebuilt. The really challenging part of this is the 2,300 evenings and mornings until the sanctuary is restored. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So let's go into some interpretation a little bit. Let's go into some historical fulfillment, and then we'll expand on some of these controversial aspects of it. Later on in the chapter, verse 23. At the latter end of their kingdom, and this is, if you go back to verse 20, I'm going to back up to verse 22 just to, so it's clear that the context is dealing with the same thing. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, so there's now 4 horns. And we know that historically Greece, that happened to Greece. And by the way, we're told in verse 21 that the goat is Greece. So there's no question about that. Greece broke into 4. Okay, during that time frame, at the latter end of that time, when the transgressors had reached their limit. Now, I believe that the transgressors in this verse is talking about Israel. And their limit means that God had lost patience with them. When the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, so we know it is a king, of bold face. I don't know what of bold face means other than to say that he was powerful. I don't think it has anything to do with his actual physical face. One who understands riddles shall arise. That's also an interesting comment about him, because that has to simply be saying that this was a capable, thinking, intelligent king. He understands riddles. He was able to solve problems and to execute solutions. As far as the horn that was broken to blade, let's see, I want to back up. The one who understands his riddle shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. He shall cause fearful destruction. He shall succeed in what he does and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. So it's simply talking about this ruler who arose from among the Greeks, who took over dominance, was intelligent, capable, and wielded a great amount of power. Well, who is that becomes the question. We'll talk about that in just a moment. He destroys the mighty and holy people. He magnifies himself. He opposes the prince of princes. And verse 25, by his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes. He shall be broken, but by no human hand. Now, we've seen that phrase a couple of times already in the book of Daniel, and in every case we've concluded that when it says not by human hand, that the point is being made of what? That the action is God, the actor is God. And so this is what is, he's going to rise to greatness and power, and when he does come down, it's not going to be because there's some other power in the world that defeats him. It's going to be because God defeats him. Again, the overall point of the book is don't worry about all of the noise of the world. God rules in the affairs of man. Remember that God is in control. And we see that expressed over and over. Daniel's not concerned about Nebuchadnezzar's rules. He continues to worship God anyway. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their expression of it is even more telling. When they're faced with death for their faith, they simply say, look, the God that we serve, he's able to deliver us. He's not limited at all. He can overpower you. He can keep this from happening. He can deliver us from this fire. But even if he doesn't, we can't worship anyone but him. That's the ultimate statement of faith. God has the power to intervene, but I understand he may not intervene, and that's okay too. I will still acknowledge him because ultimately I know that God is on my side and defending me. That is expressed in the New Testament by countless people, but one of the most obvious ones is by the Apostle Paul, who, faced with his own impending death, said, doesn't matter. Or if you go backwards, in Abraham. And so just to recall that story for a moment. So Abraham is promised that through your seed, I'm going to make a great nation, and they're going to populate the earth. All right, so how's that going to be possible? Well, Abraham has to have children. Problem is, when this promise was made, how many children did Abraham have? None. And then a lot of time passes, and the promise is made again. And Abraham's getting old. And how many children does Abraham have? None. And it gets so bad that his wife says, let's help God out. Take my handmaid, have a child for me with her. Because clearly, I'm not going to have any children. And Ishmael is born. And Ishmael grows up. Ishmael becomes a teenager. And God makes the promise to Abraham again. And Abraham says what to God this time? I have a son. Why not fulfill the promise through Ishmael? And God said, no, I told you that your son would come from your wife Sarah. But by this time, how old is Abraham? Abraham's almost 100 years old. And his wife is almost 90. And she's past childbearing years. And the messenger from God says, this time next year, you'll be expecting your child. And lo and behold, that comes to pass. And so this child is born to a man whom the Bible describes as good as dead. That's the language it uses. He was as good as dead. And yet he's finally got this child of promise that he's waited his entire adult life for. And then the lad grows up. We don't know exactly how old he was, but not married yet. I'm going to go with, again, probably teenage years. And God says what to Abraham? Go sacrifice it. Now, Abraham has been involved in this promise at this point for nearly a century. And God has gone through all of this to show him, no, it's going to happen the way I promised it to you. It's going to be your wife who has a son. He's going to be the child of promise. He's going to be the one that makes. If he kills this child, how does his son bring unto him? First off, how does one child bring a great nation about? That's the first question how many kids can a child have? Especially if you've only had one. And then the question becomes, if I kill him before he even gets married and has children, how is this possible? What does Abraham do? He obeyed God. He packed everything up and they go out. I love the story because Isaac is clearly a bright and intelligent fellow. He looks around and he says, okay, we've got the wood. We've got everything we need. But you can bring a lamb with you. Well, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham's response is God will provide, which is very loaded with symbolism as well. That's exactly what happens. Literally, it's also a shadow of God's provision of the Messiah. There's all kind of depth to that statement. But anyway, it gets to the point that he's actually bound his son, put his son on the altar, and has the knife. And God says, stop, and provides a ram. Now, the Old Testament record of that doesn't tell us what's going on in Abraham's mind. It just tells us that Abraham obeyed God. We have to go to Hebrews chapter 11 to find out what was going on in Abraham's mind. What was Abraham thinking in terms of sacrificing Isaac against the fulfillment of the promise that through Isaac this great nation was going to arise? What was Abraham's thought pattern? God would bring him back from the dead if that's what he had to do. God would keep his promise. Even if it meant raising Isaac from the dead, God would keep his promise. Up until that point, how many people have been raised from the dead? Exactly 0 that we know about. Why would he even imagine that? Because he knew God was not limited by anything. He knew that God was in control of everything, including life and death, in a way that man has no control. That is the same kind of thing that's going on here. Only now we're being told that it's not limited to the people of God. It's true across the board. It was true with Nebuchadnezzar. To what degree was it true with Nebuchadnezzar? Well, when God decided that Nebuchadnezzar was going to lose control of his kingdom, what happened to him? He lost his mind and was run out of town and lived like an animal in the wild. when God wanted him restored to the throne, what happened to him? He got his mind back and he was restored to the throne. Now, there's all kinds of levels of not human hands going on here, because listen, if you show signs of being mentally unstable, let's just envision this for a moment, okay? Let's envision we have a U.S. president who literally goes crazy, completely crazy, and goes out in the field and eats grass and lives like an animal. And the people finally go, okay, we got to do something about this. They invoke the 25th Amendment. They remove him from office and replace him. Then he wakes up one day, goes in, gets his hair cut, gets cleaned up, takes a shower, puts a suit on, walks back into Washington and says, okay, I'm better now. Does anybody think he's ever going to be president again? Yet these people receive Nebuchadnezzar back, and he's restored to his position. Why? Because God wanted it. And the whole point, and it's going to be stressed, is God rules in the affairs of men. Not God rules in the affairs of his church, not God rules in the affairs of his nation, of his people, of his temple. God rules in the affairs of men. So no matter what's happening in the world, no matter how crazy it is, no matter how much power the wrong people have, no matter what they're doing with that power, what should we always know? God is in control. And I don't have to worry about it. I just keep living my life the way God has instructed me to live. And even if that causes my death, I have nothing to fear, because God is in control. And he will do exactly what he's promised to do, even if that means that he has to raise me from the dead, which, by the way, he's promised to do. So, all of this is about that. It's about expressing the sovereign power of God. The first 6 chapters is a historical narrative showing examples of it happening, and then the apocalyptic visions that go along with that, expressing the same truths. And so that's kind of what we have going on here. He's going to fall, but he's going to fall when God wants him to fall. And that's been true all throughout history. That's how Babylon lost control, and Assyria before them. Babylon rose to prominence over Assyria. Why? Because God wanted it to happen. Babylon lost control to the Medes and the Persians. Why? Because God wanted it to happen. We learned in chapter 7 that the way the Medes and the Persians was going to work, and this was long before they had control, is that in the latter years of that period, the Persians were going to rise to power above the Medes, which, by the way, history tells us happened, just as Daniel had prophesied it would happen. Then after the Medes and Persians, the Greeks, and then after the Greeks, the Romans, and then after the Romans, and there might be another kingdom that I'm forgetting about historically, but the next big world dominant kingdom that I can think of is the UK. Why isn't the UK in power anymore? Why don't they control the earth anymore? Because God chose for them not to. And he raised up someone else. And that will continue to be the case for as long as men are on the earth, because God rules in the affairs of men. And sometimes these are good kingdoms and people are being blessed and given dominion. And sometimes they are not good kingdoms and God is raising them up and using them to exercise discipline. And so that's the historical import of all these things. So let's talk about the historical fulfillment of the specific things that are going on here. A lot of people identify Antiochus IV as this little horn. He desecrated the temple in Jerusalem and halted the sacrifices, according to the book of First Maccabees in chapter 1. Very possible that is an explanation. His downfall was without human hands, and that mirrors the fate of all who exalt themselves against God, and so that's a reasonable interpretation. Some folks may throw other names out there. I think Alexander the Great is one of the ones who immediately comes to mind as far as world dominance from Greece, but I actually think he was before some of these events. So Antiochus IV may very well be the individual. Does it matter who the specific individual is? And the answer is no. And I'll tell you why I believe that, for two reasons I believe that. Number one, if it mattered, we would be told. It doesn't matter. And the fact that we're not told specifically, this is who I'm talking about, means that it doesn't matter and that there is a more general thing to learn from this. We're not learning about a specific historical event. That's not the purpose of the record. Is the Bible, here, I'll ask it, how can I ask this question? Is the Bible historical? Yes. Is the Bible a history? No. And those two statements are extremely important to keep in mind. Is the Bible, I'll use the modern word, I hate it. It's a misuse of the language, and it doesn't even really work good here, but is the Bible scientific? Does it talk about physiological phenomenon? Yes, to some extent. The book of Job clearly has sections of it like that. The book of Genesis has sections. We learn about the stars, and there's things that are said about the rain cycle and various things that we learn about that are here. Is it scientific? Yes. Is it a science textbook? No, it's not here to teach us how the world works. It's to teach us something completely different than that. It's exactly the case here. This isn't telling us about human geopolitical history. It's telling us about this so that we understand that behind human geopolitical history is God. And above, when you get to the highest level of human dominance, let's imagine that some emperor comes up that actually is able to accomplish what all of them have always wanted to accomplish, and that is absolute control of the entire earth. One guy who controls every piece of land and every people in all places. And at his word, everybody jumps. You have that happen. Guess what? God is still above him. Doesn't matter how great men arise to, or how great our accomplishments are, or how powerful we become, or how much influence we exercise, God is still in control. And that's the bigger and more important lesson. All right, some controversial things. The dual fulfillment idea of this little horn. Anybody know what I mean by that phrase, dual fulfillment? Okay, it's true in two different senses. And there's a lot of Old Testament prophecy that people will talk about as having dual fulfillment. I'm not always sold on that. I think that Old Testament prophecy almost always is talking about the spiritual thing primarily. And that's what I focus on. But some people say, oh, this is fulfilled in these events on the earth. And then you point out how it shows, and they go, well, yeah, that too. It's a dual fulfillment. They argue that about this. Okay, so it's Antiochus is the small horn, but it's also some other future anti-God human ruler whom we're going to call the Antichrist. That's going to rise up to this great dominance and is going to to control the people of God and refuse to allow worship to happen. And this is not always, but almost always connected with premillennial theology. I'm just going to go straight for, I believe that is wrong, that they're missing the point. In fact, what the Bible says, and you can look at 1 John 2:18, you can look at 2 John 7, you can look at some other places, there are many antichrists. There is not the Antichrist in the sense that there's a particular individual that is going to someday rise up to power, and that's going to signal that all of the end times things are about to happen. That's just not the biblical account or even the point of what God's trying to accomplish in the Bible. So that's that controversy out of the way. Anybody want to make the argument to the other side? I don't want to dominate the discussion on that. The other one is the 2,300 evenings and mornings, and there's a lot of debate about that. There's always a lot of debate about these time things. There's always a lot of debate about these time things. Some people say, oh, that's possibly 1,150 days when you count each evening and morning as one daily sacrifice. There's evening and there's morning. Okay, the daily sacrifice. So 1,150 days. That's how long this guy's going to reign. I think that's a mistake as well. I'm not convinced that any of these symbolic dates represent literal periods of time. I think that they are pictures of some time period that is limited. The point that's being made is it's not going to be unlimited. It's going to be constrained. And it's not always going to be this way. Now, here's a lesson for you and I. Let's imagine a world in where the United States gets to where it literally persecutes people for practicing the Christian faith. Not discourages it, not argues things against it, not acts as though it doesn't matter, which is kind of where we're at and where we've been for a number of decades. We're here today, and we're not going to be summarily lined up against the brick wall and shot because we're here. We're not going to be arrested and put in jail because we're here worshiping today. But imagine a world where that's the case, where it's actually being quashed by the power of the government, and we are the faithful few. And it's as bleak as you can imagine. What can we know? It's limited. It's only going to go on for so long. So what should I do? Just keep doing what I know is right. What if they're threatening to kill me? You do exactly what John and Peter did. You decide whether or not we've done anything worthy of death, but we must obey God rather than men. It's just that simple. Knowing that ultimately God is behind it all, and that whatever arises is of limited duration as a result of that. And so I just keep pressing on, and I don't worry about it. Those are lessons from Daniel that we take away and we put into practice in our daily lives. And keep that in mind. All right, anybody have any questions or comments? If the Lord wills, I will not be here next Sunday, so a week from Sunday, unless whoever covers for me next week wants to cover Daniel chapter 8, verses 15 through 27. It'll be 2 weeks from today. You're welcome to do it. Whoever's teaching class, you're welcome to do it. I think the guy who's teaching class is going, nope, not. All right. So 2 weeks from today, if the Lord wills, we'll be back in Daniel 8. Appreciate your presence.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven. of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory.